Hello, I'm Sue Andersen, grief guide and yoga teacher, dedicated to helping individuals navigate the challenging journey of loss. Welcome to Growth from Grief, where I aim to offer strategies to transition from the depths of grief to the path of healing. Whatever loss you are grappling with, here you'll discover support to ease both the physical and emotional burdens of grief. Together, let's embark on a journey towards strength, peace, and healing. I'm so glad you are here. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Growth from Grief. Today we're going to talk about anxiety and grief. So first, let's start with a definition of anxiety. And my go-to book when talking about emotions is from Brené Brown. It's called Atlas from the Heart. So she defines anxiety or describes anxiety as escalating loss of control, worst case scenario thinking and imagery, and total uncertainty. That's how she thinks about anxiety herself. It's also an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. Part of anxiety is worry. Worry and anxiety go together, but worry is the thinking part of anxiety. So it's not an emotion like anxiety. So now that we have some foundation of what the definition of anxiety is, or some definitions of anxiety are, let's talk about it in relation to grief and maybe how you're feeling during your grief journey after your loss. When we lose someone, maybe this person was our partner, helpful in terms of finances, for example, or maybe they made the most money. They had the financial control. They were the person that managed the finances. And then they are gone, they died, and now you're left trying to figure out what to do. Anxious about your financial future. There's other things that we could also be anxious about in relation to our grief. What will happen in the future? What's going to happen to my house? So there's practical things that we would be worried about and anxious about. Right? Those are things that maybe come to the forefront, early on, thinking about, how am I going to do this on my own kind of thinking. You could also be thinking about other deaths. So this person died. Who's going to be next? What happens if this other person dies? Those thoughts are very common, rolls around in your head. I think I certainly thought about that. You might think about it too. There's all kinds of fears that we face or we think about that turn into anxiety, make us anxious. Claire Bidwell Smith, who wrote the book Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief, writes, after the death of a loved one, many of the fears run through your mind can be perceived as more of a threat than before the loss. So you may have a sense of dread. And because we're in the midst of grief and all these other emotions are happening at the same time, that just exasperates it, doesn't it? If you recall in other episodes prior to this one, I've spoken about the grief blob. And I like to think of that, of our emotions, our grief, as sort of this amorphous, blobby thing where all these emotions live and pulsate, and some are more intense at others. Especially during the early days of grief, they're more intense and sometimes can feel paralyzing, like can't get up, can't do anything. We are in the midst of so much pain, we can't do anything. It's hard to eat. And these are the things that we have to remember, of course. The thought of going to the grocery store, that puts fear and dread into you. I remember people telling me that after their loved one died, specifically someone whose son had died by suicide, that she dreaded going to the grocery store because people would see her and kind of run away. They didn't want to have a conversation with her. They didn't want to face her. And she tried to go to places that she didn't know anyone, so she wouldn't have to deal with this. It would cause so much anxiety and so much worry. You might be thinking, what if I meet up with somebody I know, and somebody that I know really well but hasn't really reached out to me since my loss? What's that going to be like? And you kind of dread these everyday things, causing anxiety. Anxiety can show up in the body, and affect us physically, right? Our blood pressure. It can cause us to be easily fatigued. We can be more restless. We can sleep a lot or not sleep. We can feel a shortness of breath. So we have this feeling, what's going to happen? How is it going to affect us? The anxiety, the worry. And worrying is in our minds, right? Worrying is the thinking part of anxiety. Worry is something that we do have control over because it's in our mind. So I'll give you this example. If you are anticipating an event, it could be, especially if this is the first year of your loss, first year that you're facing this, you could be anticipating a birthday or an anniversary. This is the first time you're facing this without the person that you loved. So this anticipation brings up a lot of anxiety, and then you start worrying. You start feeling this physically. Maybe you feel irritable. Maybe you're restless. Maybe you feel your heart beating, your blood pressure going up. You feel it in your body. But it's also going on in your mind. You're thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? How am I going to face this? Sort of that worry is going just in a circle in your head, right? That hamster wheel of thoughts. I want to just mention that anticipation of these events can actually feel worse. Anticipating this first birthday, this first anniversary, the anticipation can actually be worse. I know it was for me. It absolutely was for me. I dreaded it. I dreaded my birthday. I dreaded everything, right? And the anticipation was just awful. Now, there are a few things that you can do when you feel this anticipation. You want to get this worry out of your head. So maybe you start writing things down. What are you thinking might happen on that day? What do you think you might need on that day? Something that you might need to do on that day? Do you want to prepare? And there's no right or wrong. You may not know what you need, but the idea here is that you are getting out of your head and you're writing it down. And when you write the worry down, you have a chance to relook at it, to think again about, gee, maybe I would like to go here instead of being at my house. Or maybe I just want to be alone. But you have that opportunity. You can write down how you're feeling. So get them down on paper. Write them out. I did this exercise, if you will, when my son died multiple times. But not just when my son died, when my dad died, when my first husband died, all the losses that I've had, I've felt a little bit better when I've been able to get out of my head and put things down on paper. Just jot them down. Could be just notes. Doesn't have to be full journal entries. In her book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Megan Devine relays a number of stories about her, I believe, first months after the death of her partner. And she talks about just being so out of it that she didn't even know what day it was. And turned out she had to go to the grocery store, wasn't paying attention to anything outside of her world, and got to the grocery store on what turned out to be Valentine's Day and couldn't stay in the store and had to leave and was so upset, so distraught, so anxious that she had to do something to calm herself down. And breathing was not going to help her at this point. So she relied on an exercise that she suggests to her clients, which I really like, and something that I didn't know about, but I can see how it would work. What she did was she drew her awareness and her attention away from herself, away from her emotions, away from her body, out into the world to something mundane. So she focused her attention on 5 things that were orange, 3 things that were green, getting out of her head, getting away from her body, and that exercise allowed her to calm herself down a little bit. And then she could take some breaths. She could drive away. And I really like that exercise of getting out of your head. I learned a similar technique earlier this year, where instead of the counting of something that has a color, you use your 5 senses. So you, for example, name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, etc. And getting away from your head, getting away from your mind, your thoughts, you're just drawing your awareness outside of your body, and then you're able to move forward, right? You're able to calm yourself enough that you can then take a calming breath. So here's a calming breath that you can try. If you're in a sitting position, comfortable seated position, you could do this in your car, not when you're driving, of course, but you can maybe close your eyes and then begin a counting breath. So you're inhaling through the nose to a count of 4 and exhaling through the nose to a count of 6. And repeat this 2 or 3 times. And then come back to your natural breath. Notice how you're feeling. Notice the effects. Does your heart rate feel slower? Has your heart rate slowed? Do you feel a little bit more relaxed? Is your mind and thoughts a little bit softer? So why does this counting breath work? Well, when we exhale, the vagus nerve, which is the longest running nerve in the body, sends a message to the heart telling it to slow down. And as the heart slows down, so does our flight or fight response. So the next time that you're feeling anxious or stressed, and you're in a position where you can do that counting breath, try it. Try it. Or try that exercise where you get out of your head and you focus on something like name 5 things that are orange or 5 things that you can see. So you are allowing your body, you're allowing your mind to relax, to focus on something that isn't you. It isn't your anxiety. It isn't your worry. So I hope that these techniques are something that you can try. Remember that we are going to feel our emotions. It's really important not to let them stay inside. We need to acknowledge them. Remember that anxiety is something that affects us physically, and worry is part of anxiety, it goes hand in hand, but worry is the thinking part. And the thinking part is something that we can control. So thanks for listening to this episode of Growth from Grief. I'll see you next time.